Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our inaugural presentation of the Homes for All, and particularly to our guests. We have a lot of guests that are coming from representatives, and we're honored to have representatives from all three levels of government here tonight. Just a few things that we have with regards to meeting protocol. We're starting tonight with the microphone muted and the camera is off. You'll notice in the bottom of the screen that you've got a number of icons here. First of all, number one is microphone control. Please, only when you're asked to do so, you can click on that and unmute yourself. Number two is camera control. And for the same thing, you can click on that and turn your camera on or off. Number three is the participants icon. And you can click on that and see the participants that we have in the meeting. Number four is the chat icon. And that is where you will be able to add a question or make a comment about a particular point. Number five is the reactions icon. And I'm just going to advance a slide to show what happens when you click on the reactions icon. You can agree with a comment by clicking on the icons, or you can raise your hand at this point. Our agenda, and I'd like to thank, there are many hands that went into creating of this presentation tonight. I'd like to thank Don Young for doing our introductions. I'd also like to thank Alan Bartel for handling the questions tonight, both sent in when you registered and also any questions if we have time from the chat. There's also Lynn-Ann Mulrooney and Liz McGorty, who are going to be helping us as secretary and a timekeeper, somebody that is really going to have to wrangle me hard on this one. And now I'd like to ask Don Young to read the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement.
FoSTRA acknowledges that South Toronto has been the site of human activity for at least 15,000 years. It is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. Today, Takaranto continues to be home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and to work on this territory. We are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to strive to make things right. As a treaty people, we commit to listen, to learn, and to work towards justice and reconciliation.
Thank you, Don. Just do a bit of an introduction of FoSTRA before we get any further. FoSTRA is the Federation of South Toronto Residents Associations, and we are representing the residents associations in Ward 4, Parkdale Hyde Park, Ward 9, Davenport, Ward 10, Spadina, Ward 13, Toronto Centre, and Ward 11 below Bloor Street, University Rosedale. And just want to have a little bit of a test, if you can recall that bottom of your screen. If you live in any of these ridings, I want you to click on your reactions and raise your hand. Okay, getting a lot. Okay, and thank you. You can all lower your hands. The purposes and objectives of FoSTRA is that we are nonpartisan. We are ensuring the creation of policy at all levels of government, ensuring our quality of life for Torontonians, ensuring that we maintain the neighborhood identity and vitality, and also to be responsible and respectful of development within its boundaries. Our key issues, as you can see on the screen, are property development, infrastructure, heritage preservation and programs, and safe and diverse, inclusive and welcoming communities, environmental initiatives, democratic self-determination of municipal planning processes, and sharing best practices wherever we can, and collaborating with local businesses, BIAs, and other stakeholders. Now, from that first item that you saw, we have developed 4 initiatives, and number 4 is affordable housing, and this is where we get our raison d'etre in dealing with not just homelessness, but also people who are houseless, low income subsidized, and overall affordable mid-income housing. There's another opportunity that we have. These are the members of FoSTRA, the residents associations. And if you happen to live in one of these residents associations, I'm asking you once again to go down to the button, click on it, and then don't raise your hand, just give me a response. And you can see several options that are available to you there. Okay. Good. Thank you very much. And I'll ask you just to lower your hands now. As I said, we're very pleased to have with us this evening members or representatives or members of the offices of all 3 levels of government. And I just want to recognize Mary Newton, Executive Assistant for the Office of Councillor Gord Perks, Spencer Julian, Advisor Communications in the Office of Councillor Alejandro Bravo, Sasha Kane, Constituency Assistant for the Office of MP Kristen Wong Tam, Alex Boros-Harmer, a Constituency Assistant in the Office of MPP Rutila Carpoche, Marietta Fox, the Executive Assistant in the Office of MPP Mary Margaret McMahon, Shai-Rose Kara, the Constituency Office Community Engagement in the Office of Nathaniel Erskine Smith, MP, Paul DeFreitas, Constituency Office of Julie Zarowitz, MP, James Graham, Constituency Manager, Office of the Honorable Chrystia Freeland, MP, and Jessica Bell, MPP for University of Rosedale, our special guest this evening. And I would ask Don Young to please introduce Jessica Bell.
Jessica Bell serves as the Ontario NDP Critic for Housing, leading the work to ensure that everyone in Ontario has a home they can afford that meets their needs. Prior to being elected in June 2018, Jessica served as the co-founder and executive director of Canada's largest transit rider-led organization, TTC Riders, winning better service and lower fares for Torontonians. She's been a lecturer at the Toronto Metropolitan University, the director of the California Food and Justice Coalition, and an advocate for environmental justice and sustainability for some of North America's most high-profile advocacy organizations. Jessica?
Thank you. That's a very lovely introduction for what will be brief introductory remarks. There is a reason why so many of you are here and why there are so many staff from political offices here. We all know that we have a housing affordability crisis and a housing supply crisis. I'm interested in listening to you all tonight when you ask questions in the chat, and to Mark. I have heard Mark's, an abbreviated presentation of Mark's before. I consider it to be excellent, and I'm looking forward to hearing it again to get more detail. We know we have a housing crisis in our city. We see it every time we go on the TTC. We see it when we walk down the street and see the encampments that are returning. We all have friends. Some of us on this call might be having a tough time paying rent right now and might be thinking of moving or even leaving the province. It is a crisis. Our party and myself believe that we need a comprehensive solution to this crisis that involves all 3 levels of government. When it comes to the province, we have a huge role to play. We need to meet the housing supply shortage that we very genuinely have and build 1.5 million homes in Ontario for Ontarians to live in. We absolutely need to move forward with building non-market and affordable housing and supportive housing to meet the need. When we have done our estimates, we've talked to experts, the number sits at about 200,000 affordable housing units over the next 10 years. Co-ops, non-market housing, housing built on public land. That is only going to happen if there is changes to our laws, like inclusionary zoning, and real government investment. And I'm really excited Mark's going to talk about a fantastic program tonight that achieves that. And then the two other planks that I think are absolutely critical is rent stabilization, so we can make rent affordable again for low-income people, moderate-income people, and middle-income people, and also really clamping down on speculation. We have people buying 10, 15, 20 homes. We have corporations coming in from Wall Street and Bay Street who are looking at buying $1 billion worth of homes. I don't think that's right. We should be building homes for Ontarians first, because housing is a human right. It's not about profit first. It's about providing homes to people first. When it comes to planning, we often don't get involved in place-space fights. It's more of a city councillor's job. But what the province and what I am very interested in is changing the rules around planning. And the two issues that I'm very focused on right now are making sure that when we are increasing density, we are ensuring that it is done quickly and responsibly, and it meets the needs of people's, both in square foot size and income, and that we're providing the services that go with it to make our cities livable, which is why Bill 23 I am so concerned about Bill 23's impact on the budget. And then the final piece I would like to share is that we do need land tribunal reform. It needs to be a tribunal that works in the public interest and not just as a rubber stamping tool. And that is currently how it is operating today. Thank you for listening to me. If you've got questions or concerns, want to have a follow-up call with me or the other officers here, please reach out. And I look forward to hearing your comments, your questions, and this excellent presentation tonight.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jessica. And we all look forward to this presentation, but thank you for your comments. I think they're very apropos that we have to get all three levels of government working in the same and pulling on the same rope in the same direction. All right. Thank you. And I just want to ask Don Young to introduce our guest speaker, Mark Richardson.
Mark Richardson is the Chief Technological Officer at Rich Analytics. He has 25 plus years of consulting experience with public sector clients at all levels of government. Mark was part of the City of Toronto's Open Data Advisory Group that helped define the city's first official open data master plan in 2018, and was a citizen member of the city's Toronto Planning Review Panel in 2015 and 2017. Mark is the founder and has been the technical lead of the HousingNow TO.com affordable housing project since 2019. Mark?
Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay.
Yep.
And you can see my slides?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. I have a lot of content to get through. There is a copy of these slides that is going to be given to everybody at the end of the presentation. There are lots of links within those slides out to other source documents as well. So the topic this evening is really around new build affordable rental housing development in Toronto today in 2023. As Donna's already mentioned, I was on the Toronto Planning Review Panel. I was part of the Open Data Community Advisory Board with the City of Toronto. So I come at affordable housing from kind of a non-traditional affordable housing approach. I come from the open data, open government transparency world rather than as a affordable housing developer. I do have almost 20 years of volunteering with Out of the Cold at Danforth Eastminster United, but I do come at tackling the affordable housing crisis from a slightly different angle, and we're going to talk about some of that tonight. So what is HousingNowTO.com? HousingNowTO.com is a pro bono professional services collective. My company, Rich Analytics, working with Toronto Metropolitan Association of Planning Students, Map Your Property, the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, architects like Smart Density, developers like Trolleybus Urban Development, Kearns Mancini, Sweeney & Co., and technology companies like Urban Sim, Agile Form, B-Vision, and Squeeze CMM. So we really, everything is off the side of our desks. None of this is paid work. It is all work that we do as pro bono work, as volunteer time, to try and make sure that all three levels of government have accurate and timely information in order to deliver affordable housing in Toronto at the speed and at the scale that we need to have it at in 2023. We also collaborate with the Toronto Region Board of Trade on all of their Housing for Workers reports that have come out for the last few years. We have regular projects with U of T School of Cities, their multidisciplinary urban capstone projects. We do a couple of projects a year with what is now called Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson, on their School of Urban and Regional Planning. Those projects are always about surplus pieces of city-owned land and what we could realistically deliver as affordable housing on those lands. We also collaborate with the Urban Land Institute and the Terwilliger Center for Housing in Washington, D.C., and we try and bring best practices from around North America about affordable housing development into the Toronto context. So today we're going to be talking about government-supported affordable rental housing in Toronto in 2023. And this chart hopefully will be helpful to people. We're really talking about housing for people who are at or below median total household income within the city of Toronto. And that median household income as of the last census was $84,000 for a household. So it really covers this kind of spectrum on this chart. We're only talking about rental housing, and it's going from social housing like TCHC through co-ops, through workforce and below market housing, through into some parts of the purpose-built rental market. But we're not talking about affordable ownership, and we're not talking about attainable condos and missing middle and things like that. We're really talking about purpose-built rental, and most of it is at a scale that is at least 75 to 100 units before we even start talking about a project. For the political folks who are on the call, the most important piece of this chart for you is that gray triangle. That is the level of government assistance. Almost all housing, with the exception of some single-family homes now, requires some level of government assistance within the city of Toronto to take place. The level of government assistance is obviously deepest for social housing, but now, 10 years ago, it probably stopped at about workforce affordable below market. Now, even condo, first-time home buyers is $400,000, $500,000 first-time condo purchasers. So there's government assistance going through all of those levels. And you can see the income levels that match along the bottom there as well. So we're focusing on rental housing. We're focusing on rental housing that requires some kind of government support. And for people who earn under $100,000 in household income is currently the number that we're probably working with in 2023. So very different examples between rent geared to income and what most government programs call affordable housing. So these are from the City of Toronto's own slides. Rent geared to income is based on 30% of household income, but as you know, there is a many-year waiting list to get into a TCHC unit. But that's because you can get into a unit at TCHC, for example, a single parent with 2 children on Ontario Works can be in a unit for as little as $226 a month. A couple over 65 may have $27,000, $28,000 of income. They are going to be renting at around about the $600 to $700 a month mark. Those rents are very, very hard to provide without huge amounts of subsidy. Any of you who are on condo boards or co-op boards, just from a state of good repair point of view, that you have to set aside more money per unit than that most months in order to keep those buildings operational and in a state of good repair. So affordable housing, when you hear CMHC talk about affordable housing, when you hear the city of Toronto talk about affordable housing, and certainly when you talk about the province right now talking about affordable housing, they're really talking about rents that are based on either average market rent or local area income. So these tend to be much higher than rent geared to income rents. And they're really aimed at people who are earning between about $35,000 and $95,000 a year now in the city of Toronto. And rents will be upwards of $1,000 a month through to about $1,800 a month, depending on the size of your unit. And those units are issued through a random draw process called a housing lottery. You may have seen some things about housing lottery in the Toronto Star recently. There's a housing lottery underway right now at Mirvish Village for a number of below market units as part of the Mirvish Village redevelopment, which I know is in your FoSTRA catchment area. So who is it for? It's for people who are in service and workforce housing type jobs. So licensed practical nurses, pensioners, construction laborers, early childhood educators. But because these rents are based on average market rent in the neighborhoods, and the average market rent now for a 2-bedroom is $2,400 a month in downtown Toronto, we're starting to see that the bottom end of those averages is now getting into the $57,000, $68,000, $78,000 a year of household income just to qualify to get in at the bottom end of those. So we're almost leaving behind those early childhood educators, those practical nurses. They're unable to qualify for these units unless there are multiple people who are getting into a roommate situation and splitting up a family unit. So our project for the HousingNowTO.com project really came out of a simple election question in August 2018. John Tory was running against Jennifer Keesmaat. There was a big push from both of them about their affordable housing plans. And Jennifer Pagliaro at the Star wrote an article that said, are John Tory and Jennifer Keesmaat's affordable housing plans achievable? And our volunteers said, that is something we can track. That is something that we can actually monitor no matter who wins this election. So John Tory won the election. He made a commitment to create 40,000 units of affordable housing over 12 years. December 8th of 2018, he announced the first 11 sites for what he was calling the Housing Now program. These were surplus sites near transit stations, but the only information we had about them on that first day was this black and white spreadsheet with some numbers and some addresses on it. There was no more data or no more information than that. So our volunteers spent about 6 or 7 weeks over the Christmas break getting as much information as we could about those first 11 sites from the city, from the open data portal, from the city planning tools. And because a lot of them were parking lots around transit stations, we also had to pull information from TTC, the Toronto Parking Authority, and from Metrolinx. We worked with Map Your Property. We worked with the Evergreen Affordability Calculator and some interns from the Toronto Metropolitan Association of Planning Students. And we created the HousingNowTO.com map, which is a free tool. It's a Google map. Anybody can get to it by going to that URL. It's interactive. It works on your mobile phone. It works on your desktop. It has site details, photographs, and it helps you track the progress. And you see exactly the same version the mayor looks at. So residents associations or anybody who goes to this website sees exactly the same version as everybody else. And we knew this was a successful project when all of the traffic to our maps in the first 3 months came from inside government. Before we'd even really done much announcements about it, we found that staff and politicians were using it in the field because it was an easy tool to pull up on their phone. We used the Ontario Affordable Housing Calculator, which Evergreen has created, which helps determine how feasible your affordable housing project is based on parking ratios, unit sizes, the kinds of rents, the sorts of interest rates you're having to pay on your loans. And that helped us estimate what would be viable and what would not be viable. So just over 4 years ago, in January 2019, we launched the map. We've just passed 125,000 visitors to the map over the last 4 years. And we really use these 4 principles that we're public and open. We're trying to be clear with our information. We are transparent about process, because process kills projects all the time. And we're tracking against targets. If you say you want to create this many thousand affordable housing units over the next 10 years, you've got to be creating a lot of them and setting a lot of new rules and policy in year 1, year 2, year 3 in order to get to them. So today, an affordable rent, according to the City of Toronto, this is the current proposed definition. The current definition is the number in the middle here, the $1,200 a month for a studio with incomes at about $48,000. The reduced amounts in the proposed definitions and incomes that are on the side here were passed by City Council in 2021, but they have been appealed. And they have been appealed not just by private sector developers, but also by not-for-profit and affordable housing developers, because some of these numbers are so low that if there's nothing to fill that gap, the affordable housing projects cannot proceed, because you can't get CMHC or a bank to fund your affordable housing project if you're only going to be charging $812 a month for a studio. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail in the future, but if there's a lesson that I hope you all come away from tonight's presentation, it's no matter how noble your intentions around creating affordable housing, if you're a church group or a Lions Club or a co-op or a Legion Hall and you want to create affordable housing, at some point in the process, you have to make an accountant happy. If you do not make the accountant happy, be it at CMHC, at a bank, at another institution, your project will not proceed. So when we're talking about workforce housing rents, we're often talking about rents per square foot. So an average studio unit right now in a new build is about 350 square feet. A 1-bedroom is about 550 square feet. A 2-bedroom is about 700 square feet. And a 3-bedroom is about 975 square feet. So when we're talking about TCHC or social rental RGI housing, rent geared to income, we're talking about units that are renting at or below $1 per square foot. Going back to that conversation we had before, if you're on a condo board or a co-op board, you know that $1 per square foot per month barely covers your operating costs, let alone your state of good repair. So that rent needs a huge subsidy from some level of government in order to make it viable and to keep that building viable. Currently, the city's definitions are around about $2 to $2.50 per square foot in their definition of affordable housing. So that's that studio that's running about $800, a 1-bedroom about $1,100 or $1,200, a 2-bedroom about $1,400 or $1,500, and a 3-bedroom that's under $1,900. Whereas CMHC, if you look at some of the units that are at Mirvish Village, which received a large CMHC support, some of those rents are much higher because you can be closer to $3 a square foot per month and still qualify for CMHC money because of how CMHC defines affordable housing. So you can see that in that case, a 3-bedroom can be $2,900. A 2-bedroom could be $2,100 and still qualify as affordable because it's so much cheaper than any other unit you could get in a new building in the annex in 2023. So when applying for different programs to support a new build affordable housing development, there are a lot of different definitions of what affordable rents mean to qualify for projects. And it's based on the program and the level of government that you're dealing with. So there's a lot of people who say, we need to create a lot more RGI. Fully agree with you, but you have to understand the billions and billions of dollars you're talking about in order to get back into the RGI business at speed and at scale. There are other people who say, I thought this was going to be affordable housing at Mirvish Village, and there is affordable housing at Mirvish Village, but it's more in the city workforce to CMHC range than it is in an RGI range. So where we are today, we haven't really invested in affordable housing in a meaningful way anywhere in Canada in the last 30 years. So there will be no miracles in Toronto in solving this problem. It took us a long time to get into this mess. It's going to take us a long time to get out of this mess. And there are only really three questions that any affordable housing project looks at. The first question is, does it pencil? Does this individual project make sense today in 2023? And this is the can I keep an accountant happy question. Does it scale? Can I go from 40 units to 400 units to 4,000 units by repeating this model? Or is every affordable housing project we're going to do, does it need to be handcrafted like an artisanal sort of snowflake Jenga of a project where we're trying to get all the financing and everything to fit together just perfectly and we hope nothing goes wrong? How can we speed up the delivery? We can't take 8 years to deliver 35 units of seniors housing. We're going to have to speed up the delivery. And some of the ways we're going to need to speed up the delivery mean we're going to have to do things that move at a pace that is often faster than residents associations are used to. And that's really a challenge with some residents associations in some parts of the city. And we'll talk about that a little more in a few slides. So there's basically 4 programs at the City of Toronto that we deal with primarily. Open doors are supports to privately owned lands. So Mirvish Village, for example, would have had open door supports because that was privately owned land. They waive development fees. They waive taxes, property taxes on the units, and they have a fairly long term of affordability. 25 to 40 years is what we've seen on most of those. The Housing Now and Modern TO programs are where the city has surplus land and surplus buildings that they are starting to get rid of, and they are not selling the lands like they used to. They're now doing it through a 99-year land lease so they can retain some control of what happens on those lands. The buildings are rezoned. There's often a density bonus. They waive city fees and the property taxes on the units to make the affordable housing component viable. And the minimum requirement is 1/3 of the units are in the affordable workforce bands. And it's a very long term. It's a 99-year program. Modular and rapid housing is something that only happened during COVID. So these are mostly hotel conversions, and the modular housing, which I know there are a couple of. There's one that's underway in Parkdale right now. There's a number of them in Beaches, East York. And there's another one that is in the Davenport ward as well. So city-owned lands with a not-for-profit operator, about 50 units. These are the boxes that are built in a factory and then craned into place. They all required minister's zoning orders from the province in order to move ahead in a speedy way. And they are 100% supportive housing for formerly homeless people. So these are the kinds of housing that are getting people out of shelters, out of parks, and into supportive housing in your communities. It can take anywhere from 8 to 18 months from the time that a site is picked until people are moving in. We've been very successful with this program at the City of Toronto, but there is one site that we'll talk about a little bit later on that's been a challenge because a residents association has appealed the city's request for rezoning to the OLT about a modular housing site. Inclusionary zoning. We're not really going to talk about inclusionary zoning today unless it comes up in the question and answer. Inclusionary zoning isn't really a thing right now in the city. Bill 23 means that it's a maximum of 5% of units for a maximum of 25 years. It only applies in protected major transit station area catchments once they've been certified by the minister. None of them have been certified by Minister Clark yet. They're all for privately owned lands. And if you get your application in before the protected major transit station area and the inclusionary zoning comes into effect, then inclusionary zoning does not have any effect on your application. So everything that's gone through, say, in relation to the Ontario line and the rezonings relating to the Ontario line, there's no inclusionary zoning requirement explicit in that program. So we can talk a little bit about inclusionary zoning, but it's not going to be our focus tonight during the Q&A here. We use real world cost data, and these numbers actually just got updated this morning. This slide is a little bit out of date. So everything, all those numbers you're seeing there from the Altus Group cost guide on private sector price per square foot in the GTA. If we're building downtown in the neighborhoods where FoSTRA is, where it's hard to get a cement truck in, where we have to work around streetcar wires, where there's a lot of traffic and a lot of congestion, you're going to be in the highest part of the GTA costs for building. Basically, our students, when we're looking at a site now, are using about $380 a square foot as our cost estimate for building new affordable housing in the city of Toronto, particularly in your part of the city of Toronto. So it's very expensive to build anything, and there is no discount if I'm an affordable housing developer. There's no secret cement factory just waiting for affordable housing projects. There are no magical plumbing elves that come in the night. You pay plumbers what you pay plumbers. You buy windows at the same price you pay to everybody else. You'll sometimes get a little bit of a donation from one of the unions, but it is not anything to offset the cost that you pay or the cost that you pay when we're developing stuff. So Canadian Affordable Housing Development Corporation have a really good statistic. And it's another thing that one of the things I'd like you to leave here remembering tonight. Remember this number. Math matters in every project, and time is money, and a lot of organizations have the best of intentions about creating affordable housing on their lands. Churches and Legion halls and synagogues and Lions clubs and all kinds of community organizations. But more than 90% of affordable housing projects never get past the feasibility stage in Canada. An average affordable housing construction loan right now in Toronto is probably $70 million. How ready is any church or Legion hall or organization that's used to fundraising through bake sales and meat raffles and car washes, how ready are they to take on a $75 million capital project? Most of them are not, and there's a lot of institutional and organizational risk. So therefore, a lot of people spend some money, hire an architect, hire a planner, draw some plans, then the project doesn't happen when push comes to shove because it's just too high a financial hurdle for that entity to take on by itself. And it's not just in Toronto. Nice policy does not equal successful projects. Vancouver had an affordable rental housing pilot project a few years ago. They had 20 proposals that were selected by Vancouver's Office of Affordable Rental Housing. And within a year, 6 of them, so 30% of them, had withdrawn within the first year. I haven't updated the numbers on this yet, but I think almost all of them ended up withdrawing by the end of the day. Even here in Toronto, time is money. This is a project in Scarborough from an experienced developer. They built things within the last 5 years. They know what they're doing. This is a quote from last summer. This project was very viable in January and February. It's really the interest rate increases in the last 3 to 4 months that have put this project in jeopardy. And when we talk about interest rate increases, we'll go back to Mirvish Village. There was a large announcement in 2020, I think, early 2020, about Mirvish Village, about the federal government making a $200 million investment in affordable housing at Mirvish Village. Well, it was an investment, but it wasn't a grant. It was a loan. And it was a loan at only slightly below what the Bank of Canada rates are for interest. In 2020, that was under 2%. Now we're over 5%. So the cost of money is like 3 times what it was when people were planning these projects 2-3 years ago. The government used to be in the grants to affordable housing building operators. They don't do that as much anymore, and that's part of the challenge. We also have a challenge at City Hall. This was an affordable housing project near where I live, near Little India, Coxwell and Gerrard area. 6 stories, co-op, seniors, 32 units, great project. This was about 5 years ago. The City of Toronto said that 32 units of seniors housing needed over 40 units of underground parking spaces. So this not-for-profit would have to spend over $4 million digging down for parking before it created 1 unit of affordable housing. The good news is this was an example where we helped to kill parking minimums in the city. The bad news is that site today is still an empty lot, and that affordable housing project is no further along than it was 5 years ago. And in fact, the numbers are now probably worse because of the increase in construction costs and the increase in interest rates versus what they were in 2017, 2018. So the city now has 21 sites in the Housing Now program. They're aiming to create about 15,000 homes on it, and about 5,500 of them in the affordable spectrum. Some percentage of them will service people as low as $21,000 a year in annual income, but it will really be about 3% of the overall number. So of that 5,500 units, across 14,000 units of housing on city-owned land with all the incentives, you're probably only going to get about 550 units that are in the rent geared to income, social housing, deeply affordable income bands. That is the kinds of scale you have to build at to create a small number of RGI units with the current financial constraints that we have in the city and the current federal and provincial support programs that we have available to us. So nice policy does not equal successful projects. The mayor announced the Housing Now program. This was the first article about our work from our volunteers in August 2019. Local activists warned that 3 of the 4 initial sites for Housing Now are not dense enough to make financial sense and risk never being built. This is 2022. Housing Now was approved by council in January 29 and has since been dogged by delays as a number of projects has swelled to 21. So we still have not broken ground on a single Housing Now site yet in the city of Toronto. This is not to crap on the mayor's plan in any way. If anything, the challenge with Housing Now is it was not aggressive enough early enough. The densities were too low. They should have gone for minister's zoning orders on these sites rather than going through the regular consultation process. If we have a housing crisis, we need to act like it's actually a crisis. We may start to break ground on some Housing Now sites in 2023. Probably not some of these early sites, probably some of the more recent sites where the math is a little bit better. But many of these round 1 sites are going to have to be upzoned again. They're going to have to be increased in height and density. It's the only way that these programs will work. And the federal government and the provincial government is going to have to come with additional supports and lower interest loans to make these projects work as well. We also lose affordable housing. This is a piece of city-owned land in Scarborough that predates the Housing Now program. So this is what the city used to do before Housing Now in 2016, 2017, 2018. So it was a surplus piece of City of Toronto land near the Guildwood GO station. They were offering a large amount of affordable housing in 2018, but the neighbors nearby living in bungalows near the Guildwood GO station complained. The local councillor at that time, who was also the budget chief, Gary Crawford, waded into it to, we need to respect the voice of the local citizens. And this is what happened. We went from a 27-story building with 386 units and 116 units of affordable to a revised proposal with only 19 stories. So we went from 27 to 19. We cut 9 stories out of the building. We cut 100 units out of the building from 386 to 285. But almost all of the units that got cut were the affordable units. The affordable units are the first things to go when you start scaling down heights and densities on a building and the floor area of a building, because they're essentially the bonus units. They are we sometimes call it the supersize your fries units that you are able to create since you're already building the project. Speed and scale really matter. This is a great building, wood green. It's 35 units of permanent affordable rental housing. It's on an old church site near Leslie and Gerrard in Toronto. Great operator. It's for seniors. It expands an existing seniors housing building. There's a daycare on the main floor, but it took almost 8 years from the time it first went to City Hall in 2013 until it actually moved in summer 2022. We can't take that long for 35 units of seniors housing. Things have to move faster, and the processes have to be repeatable over and over and over again if we're going to create the thousands of units that we need. Modular housing, we've talked a little bit about. This is probably the most successful modular housing site. It was designed to create housing for folks who are homeless. The very first site, Macy Avenue near Victoria Park subway station, it required a minister's zoning order. It started in April and people were moved in by Christmas. It was 8 months from being a green field to being housing for over 50 people who had formerly been sleeping in parks and in shelters. That's the kind of speed, the kind of scale that we need to repeat over and over and over again. So we're going to skip through a little bit on the OLT appeals. I'll just be very clear that we have Housing Now sites that have been appealed by a neighbor in a condo in Scarborough. We have another modular housing site in Willowdale. It's been over 555 days now. In fact, it's probably coming up on 600 days since the city requested a minister's zoning order from Minister Clark. The neighbors have appealed against the regular city rezoning. The minister has refused to sign the MZO, and the Bayview-Cummer Residents Association, who all live in multi-million-dollar houses and many of them with backyard swimming pools, only had to spend $400 to block the affordable housing, modular housing on that site. That is a problem. It is a problem that needs to be dealt with by removing the right of appeal for certain kinds of housing projects in the city of Toronto, and in fact, all across Ontario, because Mayor Cam Guthrie in Guelph has exactly the same problem. It took a full year. They lost thousands of hours in taxpayers' money, and the people who they were trying to help will have to wait even longer. Our contribution to the Affordable Housing Task Force report, which came out last year, is that we need to remove the abusive process. That if an affordable housing project is at least 30% affordable, where the units are guaranteed affordable for at least 40 years, that project should not be appealable in the province of Ontario. And that still hasn't been enacted by the current government. But every time we talk to the current government, that's one of the things we underline, and we're aligned with the Big City Mayors Caucus and many others on having to make affordable housing projects unappealable in the province of Ontario. Talking about building extra floor plates to allow for more affordable housing units at a marginal cost. This is that supersize your fries, again, idea, the density bonus. So I'm already building a 20-story building. If you let me build a 25-story building, it's much easier to make some of those units in that extra 5 stories affordable because the cost is an incremental cost. I've already done most of the work. Adding a few more floors is a very simple way to create more housing. So here's an example in the area that FoSTRA covers, which is the City Place area. In 2017, there was a project proposed on a parcel of land in City Place near Bathurst and Front. And it was an 8 or 9 story building with 80 units of affordable housing. And the land had been declared surplus, and this was before our volunteers started our work, but the project never went anywhere. That size and scale, nobody's building a 9-story building in City Place. It made no sense in 2016, 2017, but that was what the city believed was the appropriate thing to do with surplus city lands back then. That deal fell apart. Our volunteers came back in February of 2020, and we said that at minimum it needed to be to about 22 stories, be put into the Housing Now program, and it might be a viable project for the Housing Now program if they were willing to radically change their massings. And less than a year and a half later, it had been successful with the help of Joe Cressy and city planning and some others. It realistically came in, I think 29 stories is where it ended up at. And you know, Councillor Cressy comes from the left, from the NDP side of the council, and the increasing the height and density on city-owned land is what generates affordable housing in today's market. And that is something that we really need people to not just understand, we also need them to embrace. That yes, buildings may need to be a few floors taller than they are in order to make the affordable housing math work. Because we get the opposite. This is a provincially owned piece of land. I think it's also in the FoSTRA area. It's near Yonge and College. It's where the old coroner's office used to be at the City of Toronto. There was a proposal there in April of 2019. There are a couple of things happened on there. First of all, if you look at that grid, you can see that some of the units were going to be in the deeply affordable band. They were going to have 4-bedroom units for $782 available as rentals in there because of the way the deal had been structured. However, at the same time, the province, and this was a deal that was mostly negotiated under previous governments before the PCs came in, they were still selling the land. They weren't doing a land lease like the City of Toronto does on its Housing Now sites. So $36 million was extracted by the province for that land. That means that every unit in that building had a $42,000, $43,000 cost that the province was extracting out of that unit. If the province had not taken the $36 million, we probably could have achieved more affordable housing units on that site. And it wasn't like this province was giving money for that. It was just could have had an opportunity to take less money. However, the original plan was for a 35 and 50-story tower with 844 units. Unfortunately, city planning didn't like that because there was a very minor shadow on a nearby park. That very minor shadow on a nearby park cost, I believe, 7 floors out of the building. It cost about 100 units of overall housing, and it cost 26 units of affordable housing which contained 54 affordable bedrooms that had been cut out of it. Making that choice about the shadow study directly impacted the number of affordable housing units. And you can also see it cut all of the 4-bedroom units out of the mix. And because the province had still taken $36 million out of it, now rather than being $43,000 per door the province has extracted, because we've only got 770 units, the province is now extracting nearly $47,000 per unit in land cost out of that. We can't create affordable housing if we are pulling money out of these projects at different levels of government. We need to be putting money into these projects, and we need to be saying it's okay to add a few more floors, which is exactly what we did on this Housing Now site at 405 Sherbourne. City-owned parking lot across from the Phoenix Concert Hall. It's in the Cabbagetown Heritage Conservation District. At the time it was announced, it was in Finance Minister Bill Morneau's ward of Toronto Centre. So he's departed now, but at that time, it was in the Finance Minister's ward. We used Penciler and the Urban Sim tools to look at what was allowed on that site by default. By default, in like 2020, the City of Toronto only allows a 3-story, 30-unit building on that site. The zoning is totally incompatible with any ability to create affordable housing on that site. It's decades out of date. So we looked at a number of different iterations, mid-rise, we looked at mid-teens, we looked all the way into the mid-20s. We also ignored most of the tower design guidelines because we were looking at the design guidelines that applied to earlier towers that had been built in the neighborhood. And we decided that realistically, about 22 stories in height was probably the minimum that would be viable for an affordable housing project on this site. Create TO, which is the City of Toronto's development arm, agreed with us that 22 was probably the minimum height available. So that would generate for them 218 affordable house, 216 total units, but with 108 of them would be affordable. So it's a building designed to be run by a co-op or a not-for-profit. And Councillor, she was then Councillor Wong Tam, she is now MPP Wong Tam, worked very hard on this site to make sure that it would be viable for a not-for-profit partner. But construction costs, interest rates, all of those things are increasing over between November 2020 when this proposal was announced and today it's still a parking lot. So we have to always build a little bit of hedge into it for ourselves. So we looked at the 22-story building. We also said that realistically they could look at a 25 or a 27-story building, which would generate more affordable housing units, would generate more market rent units, and would allow them to create a more secure financial policy moving forward for that building. But there were concerns again about a shadow on a park, like there were on the Grosvenor and Grenville site. So our volunteers created an animation that showed the difference on the 22, 25, and 27. And this little bit of shadow, extra shadow on this particular park in March was the additional shadow that going to 27 stories would get you. And realistically, if we have people sleeping in parks, should our priority be shadow on a park, or should it be creating more affordable housing on city-owned or government-owned lands? I know where my vote falls in there, but we have some very strict policies, and those policies sometimes need to be nudged a little bit in order to make affordable housing viable. So we ended up with that, with Create TO came back in March 2021. It's a 25-story mixed-use building now with 266 total units, 133 market, 133 affordable. So just by adding those 3 more floors We added another 20-some affordable housing units into this project, and it's much more viable for construction now than it would have been in the past. We've also done some projects with Toronto Metropolitan University. This is a very small site near Dundas and Ossington. The link to the full report is there. We talked a lot about the city's urban design guidelines. The urban design guidelines are very, very painful for affordable housing developers and for affordable housing operators. Angular plane is not free. It kills projects on the regular, and we've already worked to have some of those policies relaxed along the Danforth, where the subway station runs, and we believe that those urban design guidelines need to be relaxed for affordable housing developers elsewhere all around the city. For the folks who are on the call representing people from Ottawa and even from Queen's Park, our push is always that affordable housing is infrastructure. The federal government will show up and you will spend billions of dollars on transit, and you won't make us come to you to ask for the funding one station at a time. We will make a plan for 15, 20 stations, 10 stations, and you will fund that whole plan. The City of Toronto has a plan for Housing Now sites with 21 sites in it. Every single site requires an individual application to CMHC for per project funding. There's no way for us to make that process work moving forward. So the feds and the province need to fund whole programs rather than one-by-one projects. We also want to talk about areas that really run through all of your geography as FoSTRA. So there are transit-oriented communities that have been defined by Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario, essentially residential towers directly adjacent to or above the new Ontario line stations. And we consider these affordable housing opportunity sites. So just across the ones that have already been announced by the province, so between Exhibition and Gerrard Station, there are over 8,000 total residential units proposed. Right now, we have 215 that are locked in for affordable. We need to actively push on the province, on Infrastructure Ontario, on Metrolinx, and on the federal government to make a deal that bulk finances a large percentage of these units as affordable units adjacent to the transit infrastructure that the federal government is already paying for. These are transit-oriented workforce housing opportunities. So an example there of the King and Bathurst station, King and Bathurst station on the Ontario line is going to have about 422 units. Either one of those towers with about 180 to 235, either one of those could be bought outright by the federal government and could be used, partnered out with a not-for-profit partner. And it would allow us to create affordable housing in place adjacent to transit to make these projects work. Quayside, I think this whole presentation tonight really started from a tour we did with one of the residents groups. We do these affordable housing tours. We did a lot of them last year during the city council election. We're happy to come out and do them in your neighborhoods. We have about 10 or 15 different routes available already. So this is Quayside, which is at the bottom of Parliament Street and Queens Quay and the Lakeshore, and it's all government-owned land. Waterfront Toronto is a tripartite organization between the city, the province, and the feds. Quayside is going to have 4,300 units, 12 acres, 8 acres of those are developable, and they've got some really good numbers. They've got 23% of those are going to be affordable rental, about 800 to 875 units. The reason for that range of number of units depends on how many bedrooms you're creating per unit. If you decide you want a lot of 2 and 3 bedroom units or 4 bedroom units, then your total unit count is going to be closer to 800. If you want more 1 bedrooms and studios, then your unit count is going to be closer to 875. And then affordable ownership is going to be about 200 units, about another 5%. So 4,300 units at Quayside creates about 1,000 to 1,100 total units of affordable. Whereas we compare that to East Harbour, which is private land, but it's private land owned by the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, Cadillac Fairview. So Quayside has 43 units and has about 1,000 of them as affordable, whereas East Harbour has 215. So if any of you are teachers, if any of you are retired teachers, one of the things you could really do for us is pick up the call and, go to the board meetings of your pension fund and tell them that they need to be slightly more egalitarian with their commitments to affordable housing on lands they're developing around the city of Toronto, because they're developing a lot of it. And it's not to say that they're not doing anything. That is not a small chunk of it. 215 units of affordable housing for 99 years. The value that the Teachers Pension Fund in Cadillac Fairview is bringing to that is about $100 million that they're giving in units to the city of Toronto. Our push now is going to be to make sure that those units happen early in the process, don't get pushed till later. And we're also going to encourage the feds and the province to find ways to increase that number beyond 215 by providing incentives, low interest loans. We'd like to see that number get closer to 10% rather than 5%. Federal dollars, and in fact, any dollars. I know MPP Bell said 1.5 million homes is something that the NDP is committed to. 20% of 1.5 million homes is about 300,000 affordable homes. I think the number that MPP Bell used was 200,000 affordable homes. But when the number you need to know is that $1 billion only gets you about 2,000 to 2,500 houses or apartment units in the city of Toronto. So if we were looking at 200,000 units as affordable in the deeply affordable RGI social space, we're really talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars in new direct investment from higher levels of government in a way that we have not done that in many, many years. It's realistically $100 billion that we're looking to spend to get 200,000 deeply affordable housing units in the province of Ontario. That's folding money. And we're entering into a time of fiscal restraint. So we're going to have to do a lot of things that are going to be challenging. So I'm now at time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'm happy to go back to stuff if we need to. And we'll go from there. I don't know if there are questions, hands up. I'm happy to take your questions, and I'm happy to run a little long if we need to as well.
Okay, and I was just gonna say we want to honor everyone's time, and if you do have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, then we thank you for attending, and we hope to see you again at one of our future presentations. But I'm going to turn this over to Alan Bartel, who's got some questions that we have from the registration that we set out. Okay, and Alan, take it away.
Thank you, Mark. These questions were written by people as they were registering without the benefit of hearing your remarks. So I will read a few of them as we have time for them, and encourage you to go beyond what the questions are asking.
Okay.
Recently, the provincial government dictated changes to the definition of affordable and the duration for which units must remain affordable. How does this impact the delivery of new units of affordable rental housing in Toronto?
NDP Bell may have a better answer for this than I have. My understanding is that there are two phrases in Bill 23. One is affordable housing and one is attainable housing. And if if my Lotto Max numbers come up, then a house in Rosedale becomes attainable to me. So let's just talk about affordable. As affordable stands right now in the definition of inclusionary zoning that is in Bill 23 provincially, it is 5% of the units at 80% of average market rent for 25 years, and that is a maximum, is my understanding of the number that they use. So when you compare that to other iterations like the Housing Now program, we'd be looking for a longer period of affordability, or the Open Doors program would be, so Housing Now would be 99 years. The Open Doors program would be usually around 25 to 40 years. And the depth of affordability would be deeper than 80% of AMR. 80% of AMR right now, if average market rent for a one bedroom is $2,100, then a unit renting at about $1,700 for a one bedroom would qualify as 18% of AMR. So yeah, Jessica's typing it in.
Yes, I see that.
Yeah,
that's very good.
so I would like. It also depends on whose numbers you pick for average market rent, whether you take CMHC's numbers, whether you take it for the whole city of Toronto, whether you take it for just the census tracts around the building. So my example of the Mirvish Village example, it's very different if I look at average market rent across the whole city of Toronto than if I look at average market rent in the annex, right? Those numbers are going to be very different from one another. So it can be much more challenging. And Jessica's typing some more stuff in. The provincial government will be defining what average market rent is every year. Okay, so that'll be fun.
Yes. Okay, another question. What are the plans for senior 60-plus housing, co-ops, condos, and low-rise projects, and how can we learn where and when they are being built or renovated?
Well, there have been a couple of them that I talked about in a couple of attempts that I talked about in that presentation. So there was a co-op building near me that was for seniors that was tried in 2016, 2017, that had the underground parking requirement that killed it. There isn't really a good central source for finding new buildings. There is 640 Lansdowne, which is the Magellan Center, which I think is in Davenport, if I'm not mistaken. It's old TTC lands, and it is a combination of long-term care home plus some units of affordable seniors housing in them as well. But it is a site, another affordable housing site on government-owned land in the city of Toronto that has been appealed to the OLT by the neighbors.
Yes.
So, you know, this is a challenge. There isn't nearly enough of them. Some of the larger Housing Now sites, like the big parking lot sites at some of the subway stations, like this is Wilson Station behind me here. There are certainly incentives. If seniors housing has some financial advantages with CMHC, if you're creating seniors housing, particularly if you're creating veterans housing, like in conjunction with the Legion, seniors housing. One of the Housing Now sites at 140 Merton is seniors Aboriginal housing. So they get some very beneficial loan rates on their construction loans and some other incentives. But for regular seniors housing units, there's a huge gap. It does need to be filled. Frankly, some people are trapped in their houses now because they're no longer appropriate places for them to be living with stairs and inaccessible bathrooms and other challenges. And there isn't really a standalone stream within the Housing Now program specific to seniors housing, but I would think there should be. And I think particularly on that list of Ontario line sites that I showed across those 8,000 and something units, there's probably a seniors play to be made there by the Canadian Association of Retired People teaming up with some other folks to try and get one or more of those buildings as a seniors building. And that was a nod from our friend at Queen's Park there. So
Yes. I saw that.
Okay, more questions.
Okay. In 2020, the City of Toronto successfully launched and priced an award-winning $100 million social bond, the first social bond by a Canadian government issuer. This bond provided large investments in the Housing Action Plan to deliver social and affordable housing investments, deploy affordable basic infrastructure to communities, and support socioeconomic advancement and empowerment. Are there other opportunities like this for citizens to contribute financially to this effort, perhaps with other social bonds, debentures, and land trust opportunity?
Certainly land trust is an opportunity. I know Parkdale has a very active land trust. We work a lot with Community Circle Land Trust. They've taken over a number of the Toronto Community Housing Scattered Homes portfolio, I think 600 or 700 units in the last year. So that social bond was kind of a unicorn. It was, I think, in 2020, as the questioner said. It was $100 million. It wasn't bought by mom and pops. It wasn't local people putting their money in. It was sold on Bay Street for mostly the organizations that wanted to earn their green and their social points. So large institutions. It was $100 million, which sounds like a lot of money. But as you know from one of my final slides, $100 million is maybe 200 affordable housing units in Toronto on a good day. So we need to be creating those funds in the billions, not in the hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
And those kinds of investments were only slightly below market. So if interest rates were 2%, you were getting the money at 175 for 10 years on that bond as a social bond. With interest rates at 5.5 or 5.75 right now, even if the interest rate is down to 5 on a social bond, it's not going to help a not-for-profit operator. We need the feds to be lending money again for 30 years at 2%, like they were doing in the 1990s, to make the kinds of scale of delivery that we need. But whoever asked that question, if you're interested, I'm doing a panel next week in person in Regent Park with the Urban Land Institute. And it is the putting the S in ESG, which is putting the social in environmental, social, sustainable, and governance. And it's one of these places where we're starting to talk with the pension funds and the Bay Street types and the REITs about walking the talk on some affordable housing stuff. And if you ask me a question about debentures, you might be the kind of person who wants to show up at that meeting. So my email's in the slides, and I might even be able to squeeze a pass for you as well, so you don't have to pay Bay Street money to come to that meeting.
Okay. Perhaps one more question. How do you expect the reduction of inclusionary zoning targets by the province to impact the supply of affordable rental housing?
So let me start by saying that I think the original inclusionary zoning plan as passed by the city and as passed by Mississauga, and I think Oakville passed one as well, were all pretty deeply flawed. And that left an opportunity for the province to come in and overrule them the way they did. The inclusionary zoning is incredibly appealing, particularly to local politicians, because it's this fantasy of a free unit. And there is no such thing as a free unit. Somebody has to pay for it somewhere along the way. The inclusionary zoning, in most places where inclusionary zoning works, comes with a pretty strong density bonus and with some offsets. So the waiving of development charges, the waiving of property taxes, like what happens in the Open Doors and in the Housing Now program. If you go back and look at the draft reports from N. Barry Lyons Consulting on the first proposals for inclusionary zoning in 2017, 2018, they pretty much said that. They said offsets are going to be needed to make these projects viable. By the time it got through the City Hall sausage making, the offsets part had been totally removed, and woohoo, we were just going to get free units. And we also had some organizations and some city councilors who were saying it should be 30% of units, and they should be permanent, and they should be deeply affordable. And I just can't make that math work. Even as a not-for-profit, I couldn't make that math work. So I think the current IZ as defined isn't going to create a lot of units in Toronto, because almost everything that's inside a protected major transit station area already has a development application in place now.
Yep.
So it's grandfathered. But in other places, 5% of units for 25 years as the maximum, and 80% of AMR, something's going to have to come from somebody to extend the period of time, lower the amount of the rents. I don't know how that happens, but it needs to be 40 years, and you need to be able to squeeze some of the units down to, 60% of AMR for most of that period. And it's going to be tough, but in a way, the cities, municipal actors brought some of this upon themselves because of the way the inclusionary zoning processes worked as they were being discussed and massaged through the council.
Okay. It's 8 o'clock. It's 8:01 actually. What's your wish, Mr. Chair?
Well, as we said, if there are people that have a hard stop, I think we've kept like 98% of the people on this thing. So
there's one question in the chat, I guess.
Do you want to?
Sure. So there's Neil Betteridge. If he recalls correctly, the provincial government Infrastructure Ontario prioritized extracting funds from Cadillac Fairview for East Harbour for transit development funding rather than affordable housing units. 100% correct. And that's what they've done on all of the other sites as well. There's no such thing as a free affordable housing unit. There's no such thing as a free transit station either. Particularly some of those, at least East Harbour is on the surface. An underground transit station at Parliament and Front Street is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars in underground cost. That is not going to be affordable housing, not going to be able to be turned into affordable housing value above it, even though they're putting, I think, 1,100 units above that site. So, okay. But this is where, for the federal callers who are on, this is where Prime Minister Trudeau in Hamilton today was saying he was assuring that there would be affordable housing next to the new Hamilton LRT. You've given billions to the Ontario line. You've got a couple of years, hopefully, until your next federal election. This is where you need to cut a deal on those housing now, on those Ontario line housing developments, and get something firm, not an assurance, some actual numbers and math. And sadly, it does probably mean you're bringing a few billion more dollars to the table to make it happen.
Okay. And I've got, with the forbearance of those people that are still here, Tony, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I know it was a wonderful presentation, and I used to work in the city in their social housing doing stats. So I loved your presentation more than probably most people because it was keeping me up to date. I've been retired for 5 years. But related to the issue of trying to, residents associations, and not ours, I live on the island, Toronto Island, often fight, social housing of different sorts. We could call it affordable housing, and you mentioned that. But you also talked about trying to have the right, that there's no right to appeal of those projects. So I was just asking, from what you know, I mean, and we all know that people appeal things to delay them and cause them to collapse or and fail, like how Trump Trump in the States, it sues everybody, and then they back down or whatever. But I'm just curious, from experience, is it likely that the appeal would not win?
Yes.
Like, it's one thing to say that, okay, let's let's stop them from doing it because it's essentially needed. But if it wasn't, if it's likely to not go to succeed, then I think it'd be more supportive for people to accept that there was no appeal, that the appeal is like intended to delay and kill something rather than actual have validity. And I just wanted to clarify, because that's a big issue, I think, for some.
So I mean, we can talk to some specifics. So there's two examples that I showed you, the Housing Now site in Scarborough, next to the Scarborough Civic Center, on the parking lot there. The OLT appeal was a delay of at least 8 months. It was one neighbor in a neighboring condo. The condo is only 10 years old itself. One neighbor with $400 who delayed that project. Essentially, their argument was that had nothing to do with the Planning Act, had no legal basis whatsoever. It was, we were told by the former councillor, who is no longer a councillor, Glenda Bearmaker, and we were told by the people who sold us this condo unit that nothing taller than 8 stories would ever be built on the parking lot next to us. And that's not a Planning Act regulation. That's something that was told to you by a politician and a real estate salesperson. It had no foundation. MPP Bell is well aware of the challenges of creating this modular supportive housing in Willowdale. Over a year ago, she was standing in a parking lot next to a subway station where the modules are already finished. Those modules were supposed to have been put together by spring of this year. That hasn't happened. The minister hasn't signed the minister's zoning order. The neighbors have appealed it for $400. The other party to the appeal is the developer across the street who's building $3 million McMansions on the other side of the street from Richmond Hill. This site is going to go through another winter with the units completed, ready for assemble. And instead of people who are currently sleeping in parks or in shelters living in supportive housing in Willowdale, those people are in the ravines in Willowdale right now. And all it cost that residents association was $400. And I know it's not all residents associations, but groups like FoSTRA need to be aware that there are some bad actors out there who are residents associations. we are trying to, by doing a presentation like this, we're trying to find the good residents associations and inform them, because there are some bad actors out there who are very active in the residents associations. They know the OLT processes, they know the old OMB processes, and it costs almost nothing for them to drag out that. And even when they lose, they're not going to be charged the legal costs of the city. They're not going to be charged the storage costs of putting those 50-something modular housing units into indoor storage to protect them from the elements for 18 months. They're not going to be charged the increase in interest rates and construction costs on that project because we haven't been able to break ground on it yet. They get that for $400. That's what needs to be stopped. And I shall end my rant there.
Wow. Well, I'm gonna jump in here and thanking everybody for staying on. I'd like to thank all the FoSTRA members and the new friends that we've met, like our representatives and constituency admins, and I'd like to thank Mark for his very passionate, and you can just feel the passion on that. There was more radiation coming off my screen, I think, than I ever had. There are the hard choices that we have to make, I think, is what Mark has put out, and that it's the only way we're going to really work on this is to get all three levels of government together. Like I said, all hands on the rope and pulling in the same direction. So thank you, Mark, for this presentation. Just a note to everyone on that's left. We will be posting the video of this. So if anybody had to leave early, then you can let them know that the last couple of minutes are going to be up there with the whole presentation. We'll have the presentation slides available both from FoSTRA and from Mark. And once again, I want to thank everybody for attending and making this inaugural event quite good. I saw that Jessica also put in into the chat that if you've got some things that you want to talk to her about or email her about, then please please do so. Okay.
And my contact information is in the slides as well. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, you can send them. And I see James Graham has turned his camera on from Minister Freeland's group. At some point, I want 15 minutes with the finance minister. Can you make that happen for me, James?
I'd like 15 minutes with the finance minister, and I work for her. So
he's at the constituency office.
I know. I used to see her all the time on Porter. We were airport buddies, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, she's got hands full right now, but
yeah.
This is really helpful. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay.
Thank you to everybody at FoSTRA for this offer, and happy to do some of those tours for you once the weather warms up.
Oh yeah, the September tour that we did around the EWCA area, down along Queens Quay to Parliament, that was very informative. But I'll tell you, having this this talk today just blew my mind. You know, it's one thing to see that the actual buildings that are going up and the amount of affordable housing that's in them, but it's quite another one to get a much broader picture. And thank you again, Mark, for that.
Indeed.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and hopefully you'll let us invite you again to another one of our presentations.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thank you very much.